Is that this bill be now read a second time, and I call the honourable member for one and the minister.
Thanks, Mr Deputy Speaker. This bill goes to the heart of who we are as a nation. It is about the volunteer spirit our nation was built on. It is about our communities and about the ability of our communities to look after themselves. Mr Deputy Speaker, on Sunday I toured Coleraine and Casterton, where we've just seen the impact of floods. And you would say to yourself, what has this got to do with this legislation? Well, it's got everything to do with it, because there were houses which had been inundated, there were businesses which had been inundated, and who was there helping those communities? CFA volunteers, SES volunteers, and of course the hard-working police. They were there because they care about their communities, because they're prepared to volunteer their free time to make sure that their communities get the care that they need. And they do it because they understand how important it is to be able to look after yourself, not to wait for assistance to come from Melbourne, not to wait for assistance to come from other capital cities. It's about who we are as a nation, looking after ourselves, making sure that when you're in harm's way, there are people ready to come to your help. And what these volunteer groups want, purely and simply, is one thing: to be left alone to be able to do that. Nothing more, nothing less. And I say to the member opposite, who seems to think this is a stunt, this is not a stunt. This is one of the most important pieces of legislation that will come before this House, this parliament, in these 3 years. Our communities depend on our volunteers, and the idea that a union, an out-of-control union, will try and dictate how those volunteers do that is an absolute national disgrace. And if you think that the union doesn't care about this piece of legislation, think again. Why did Peter Marshall come to this place and meet with the crossbench senators a couple of weeks ago to convince them not to pass this piece of legislation? Why did the person who is orchestrating this, who has the state Labor government under his control, why did he come here to try and convince the crossbenchers in the Senate not to pass this legislation? If this is a stunt, why did he do that? One simple question you on that side need to answer. I don't think you will answer it, though, but because we know a couple of months ago, or you might yawn and think this is tedious and boring. Go to those Victorian communities at the moment who are relying on volunteers to keep them safe, and tell them that you think this is boring. You think this is boring. You think this is tedious. Go to those communities and ask them who are there, trying to protect them, volunteering. You go and say that to them. Go on. Go on. No, not that I'm yelling, that you think that this is tedious and boring. I just can't. It beggars belief that you would sit there, go to Casterton, go to Coleraine, go to Charlton and go and talk to those volunteers. Ask them about this. Ask them why, Bill, ask them why your leader wouldn't go to Victoria and go out to country communities while this was going on during the election campaign, because he knew he would get the truth delivered to him. He knew that he met with Peter Marshall a couple of months ago, the head of the UFU, and he had a secret meeting with Peter Marshall so that all this could slip through and he would get his way. Well, we on this side are not going to stand for it. And if I have to raise my voice to make it known we won't stand for it, I will. And I'll do it unashamedly, because this is so important. And if you don't realise it on your side of Parliament, then damn you. Mr Deputy Chair, damn them if they do not think that this is important, because this is important, this legislation. And for those opposite, just so they understand, I'm going to conclude briefly after this. Volunteer Fire Brigades Victoria was able to provide valuable input to the development of the legislation. This is what Volunteer Fire Brigades Victoria has to say, and we are very pleased that it has shaped up in a way that we believe meets our concerns and deals with the practical issues affecting volunteers. The legislation will be a simple change to the Fair Work Act. So yes, it is a thin piece of legislation, a simple change to the Fair Work Act. We don't think we need a multitude. We don't think you need a multitude of regulation to fix this. A simple change. Often the simple things in life are the best. The legislation will be a simple change to the Fair Work Act, making it objectionable for workplace agreements to restrict or limit the emergency services organisation's ability to engage or deploy its volunteers, provide support or equipment to those volunteers, manage its relationships with or work with any recognised emergency management body in relation to those volunteers, otherwise manage its operations in relation to those volunteers. Mr Deputy Speaker, I will conclude on this note because others want to speak on this. On polling day in my electorate, I went to a booth, and I won't name the booth because it could get the people who were working on that booth in trouble. There were two Labor Party members handing out how to vote cards for the Labor Party. They approached me and said, "We're handing out how to vote cards for the Labor Party because we've been members most of our lives. But we wish that we were handing out for the coalition because of what the Labor Party are doing to volunteer spirit, to volunteer organisations in the state of Victoria."